Thank you so much. And hello, everybody. I'm Norma Levy, the founder and president of New Plaza Cinema. We're a nonprofit organization. And today we're having a lively discussion about the 1984 film Places in the Heart, starring Sally Fields. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our host, Gary Palmucci.
I was very pleasantly surprised to revisit this film. Now, many of you may recall that, some of you anyway, that 1984 was the year of the farm movie, including Country with Sam Shepard and Jessica Lange. It even opened the New York Film Festival that year. The River with Mel Gibson, Sissy Spacek, and Scott Glenn. And Robert Benton's Places in the Heart. Benton being one of the last of what I would call a gentleman director, and whom Andrew Sarris once mentioned in his Village Voice column as the only New York City film director that, indeed the only adult whom he and his wife Molly Haskell knew to be a regular churchgoer. And I think that's telling based on what we saw in this film and where it comes from. Now, in addition to providing pivotal roles for a whole generation of young American actors, including Ed Harris, Amy Madigan, John Malkovich, Danny Glover, Terry O'Quinn, Benton's movie, which was his fourth as a writer-director, is not afraid to take us to some quite dark as well as liltingly optimistic places in the heart. So Max, I haven't seen this trailer. Let's see what the TriStar Pictures marketing department came up with here.
Our Heavenly Father, bless this meal and all those who are about to receive it.
Wiley, you're drunk as a skunk.
Please remind us in these hard times to be grateful for what we have been given.
Amen. Something's happened to you, Pa. It seems like I have never done anything all my life but raise kids and take care of this house.
Miss Spaulding, what we at the bank suggest is that you sell this place.
I got $28 saved.
Sweetheart, I don't want that.
Take it. If you don't, Wayne is just going to spend it on some fool thing.
Margaret, I don't need it.
Poor Will here lost his sight in the big war.
What if my brother-in-law was to move in here and rent a room from you? We would surely take it as a sign that you were doing something to provide for your family.
I don't want to be here any more than you want me to be now. I'll try not to be any more trouble than necessary.
My name's Frank. My pa was killed.
I heard about it. I'm sure sorry.
Mose! Now you move away from him right now.
I'm not selling my land, and I'm not giving my children over to anyone else to raise.
Once and for all, we can't do it. Now you best stop thinking about it before you end up killing yourself.
Now you listen to me. I don't care if it kills me. I don't care if it kills you. I'm not gonna give up. If we lose this place, I'm gonna lose what's left of my family. I'm not gonna let that happen.
Miss Spaulding, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What do you look like?
No real beauty. I'm all right.
May I please have this dance?
Frank Spaulding. I'd be most pleased.
Academy Award-winning actress Sally Field stars in a motion picture about a woman who fought for the greatest dream there is, the future. Places in the Heart, written and directed by Academy Award-winning filmmaker Robert Benton. Coming from TriStar Pictures.
So that was unusual for its time in the sense that you didn't have a narrator running throughout telling us what was going on. And TriStar Pictures was a fairly new film entity, having begun releasing pictures in 1984.
Yeah, their first big film was The Natural with Robert Redford that had come out earlier that year. Another film that they released in a very cursory fashion to the frustration of its director, Alan Rudolph, was a movie called Songwriter with Chris Christopherson and Willie Nelson, which is actually a pretty good film. And I remember at the time, Mr. Rudolph, who was a Robert Altman protege, was so frustrated with the release and the marketing of the film that he referred to TriStar Pictures advertising department as Mo, Larry, and Curly Joe. He was so frustrated at the way they had presented that film. Very briefly, it looks to me like this was a trailer that was designed, or which aspires to play in, they didn't call them that at the time, but both red and blue states audiences, and it kind of tries to walk the line, I'm sure, with lots of debate from the director and his powerhouse agent, Sam Cohn, who was then at the peak of his powers. And I would say, under those circumstances, maybe not nearly as bad as it might have turned out.
I, like yourself, had just revisited the film. I had not seen it since 1984. I saw
Me neither.
Before it was officially released at an advanced screening at the Motion Picture Academy Theater. And it was like a breath of fresh air after enduring 9 months of fairly excruciating studio releases. In 1984, aside from these offbeat films you mentioned, was not the easiest year to sit through studio films until the fall came along. And Places in the Heart was an important additive to that. And then I saw it shortly thereafter in a commercial cinema. And I had fond memories of it. But in rewatching it just last night, as a matter of fact, I was taken aback by how artfully crafted it is. And it truly is powerful cinema creation. We take for granted movies or miniseries that are period in setting, but get the period all wrong. This film had a totally authentic feel to it, look to it, the dialogue, the hairstyles, everything was completely authentic. And it's something that we kind of a care that went into it that I think we don't see anymore. And that,
well, I think you have a situation here where Max, the filmmaker, he lived it. He was born in 1932 in Waxahachie, Texas, where the movie was shot. And I guess I think based on his mother to some extent, the character of Sally Field. Am I getting that right?
So apparently the script had been in Robert Benton's mind for 9 years before the film came out. Arthur Penn, who had directed the screenplay that Benton wrote with Robert Newman, Bonnie and Clyde, urged Benton to turn his childhood Texas memories into a film. And Benton, apparently his first thoughts were to his bootlegging uncle as a main character. That's a film I would have loved to have seen, a Robert Benton film about a Texas bootlegger in the 30s. Mm-hmm. But then he found himself more interested in his great-grandmother, Edna Spaulding. And so the narrative was updated to the 30s because that's when Benton, as you mentioned, was a child in Texas. And apparently he had two uncles who died violently, one in a bootlegging incident, the other was shot by an angry father, and he had a great-grandfather who had been sheriff until being shot to death. So we see some of those elements being used in the Places in the Heart narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I think that title always struck me as some kind of a bit of a compromise or whatever, at least at the time, but less so now. I think when the movie was in production, or for many years, it was just called like the Texas Picture or the Texas Movie. It didn't have a title until fairly late in its incarnation.
It wasn't fashionable for movie fans such as myself to be supportive of a very sensitive, sentimental narrative like Places in the Heart. It wasn't considered cool. But as you mentioned, this film does go to some very, very dark places, and I think does a very impressive balancing act in its narrative between the kind of community it wants to see and the kind of community that actually exists at that time.
Yeah, and Benton had earned some trust and credibility from us, I think, in the 70s with his earlier films. Well, of course, the script for Bonnie and Clyde, that's now legendary. His first feature, Bad Company with Jeff Bridges, shot by Gordon Willis, that's not bad. Kramer versus Kramer, of course. The Late Show with Lily Tomlin and Art Carney, those were all solid movies. The one called Still of the Night with Meryl Streep and Roy Scheider, that was a bust, but everybody has a few of those in their track record.
It had a very troubled history, Still of the Night, and it was a Hitchcockian attempt on Benton's part, but it looks great and has some lyrical passages, and as of course does Places in the Heart. It's the sheer craftsmanship of the narrative is really impressive. And Dan Cahill is going to talk more about the look of Places in the Heart, but yes. I think additional credit is worthy for the film editor Carol Littleton, who I think, did an expert job assembling the footage. She got started under Lawrence Kasdan. She had already edited Body Heat. She had edited E.T. for Steven Spielberg. And then she's going to do a lot of more work for Lawrence Kasdan with The Big Chill, or she did that the year before, Wyatt Earp, Grand Canyon, and then she'll also do some work for Jonathan Demme. But it's the pacing of the film, it really moves along. And especially in that first 45 minutes, the action really is propelled forward. He and Carol Littleton don't dwell on scenes that they could have easily gotten lost in maudlin moments or emotional moments, but they're confident enough to keep moving, to take us.
And it has to pack a lot of tragedy into the first couple of reels as well. And just things just seem kind of happen, as you say, with a certain alacrity or fleetness. You know, the accidental death of the husband, the horrific lynching, the subsequent funerals. I mean, there's a lot going on there in the first couple of reels.
Absolutely. And the way it's laid out is very, very powerful. I remember thinking that the subplot involving Ed Harris and Amy Madigan seemed kind of dropped in there, but I didn't feel that as much this time. There were some critics that would have liked more of those characters. It was very fascinating, the two of them, and their interaction and how that was offsetting the Sally Field narrative. And you have these incredibly powerful, not necessarily debuts, because both Danny Glover and John Malkovich had done some television work, but this really was their breakthrough films for both those actors. And what powerful parts for them to play in that narrative.
And I think Malkovich famously was sort of doing a Robert De Niro there, as I recall, a reading at the time where he was really studying about exactly how would a blind person move, and how would his eyes be fixated on the landscape around him and those clotheslines. It was, there's a lot of preparation, to say the least, and it shows.
You had mentioned Robert Benton being a church-going New York director, even though he hailed from Texas. We certainly do get the spiritual side of him in this film, and I think praise is due for the use of religious hymns in the narrative. We heard now in the trailer the hymn that appears at the beginning and the end, called Blessed Assurance. This was an 1873 hymn by Fanny Crosby and Phoebe Knapp. Now, this is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. And it provides a very powerful bookend to the narrative.
Now, what is the song, Max, that ends? We see it, I think, if it's the same one you're talking about, which has the line, "He walks with me and he talks with me."
Yes.
Is that the same song?
So that's a different song, and that hymn is called "In the Garden," and that was written by C. Austin Miles in 1912. And he walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me I am his own.
Some of us who love the film may remember in Robert Altman's Nashville, where Ronnie Blakely sings that. And that was a favorite film of Robert Benton's. He really thought that Nashville was one of the last great American studio movie masterpieces, along with Godfather 2 and a few others from that.
I was just reminded of that today. Ronnie Blakely's character, if memory serves, she's singing that in a wheelchair in the hospital.
Exactly.
And then there's another hymn, and this for me was a fascinating political observation. I mean, for the time. We see the funerals of Wiley, the young black boy who accidentally drunkenly kills Sally Field's husband, Royce. We see their funerals almost intercut. And in the background, you hear people singing "The Sweet By and By," a very famous hymn from 1868 by Joseph P. Webster. Now, I had grown up with the political satire of that song by the labor activist Joe Hill. I wasn't around in 1910 when he wrote it, but there were films such as Bo Vederberg's Joe Hill, in which Tommy Bergen sang a song called "The Preacher and the Slave," in which he used that melody. And
that's
Ronnie
a film
Cox,
I'd like to see someday.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
very hard to see.
Exactly, 1971 film. And Ronnie Cox, who played a union organizer in Hal Ashby's Bound for Glory, also sang "The Preacher and the Slave." And "You will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky, work and pray, live on hay, you'll get pie in the sky when you die. Well, that was based on the hymn, whose original lyrics were, "In the sweet by and by we shall meet by that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by we shall meet by that beautiful shore." And for me, watching that in 1985, I was saying, the movies have changed in 15 years. I mean, we've now at a point where this film, this hymn is being treated with reverence, whereas in the past it had been used for a more political protest. It was just an observation I had back in the height of the Reagan years.
Well, I'm going to have to take a brief break here to do some cinema wrangling, but I will be back, and maybe you and Dan can now get into the
Sure.
real gift of this film, its visual style.
Absolutely. Dan Cahill, thank you, Gary. Dan Cahill is our resident cinematography specialist who is going to discuss the look of Robert Benton's Places in the Heart, which it's jaw-dropping in its compositions, and Dan has his work cut out for him. Dan, if you'd like, you're welcome to. I welcome you, and you're more than welcome to begin your observation.
Thank you very much, Max. And I'm going to thank you further for a wonderful observation you shared with me earlier today. But let me first of all get my PowerPoint up and running. This is a film directed by the gentleman you see here, Robert Benton, clutching one of his several Oscars. I'm not sure which year this photo is from. Benton, people describe him as a gentleman, and he looks like a gentleman. He apparently was a delight to work with. He also had a prominent career as a writer before starting to direct. And one of his best decisions was to hire a guy named Nestor Almendros as his cinematographer on this film, and 4 others. The first one that they collaborated on was Kramer versus Kramer, followed by Still of the Night, Places in the Heart, Nadine, and Billy Bathgate. Now, Nestor Almendros was born in Barcelona, emigrated to Paris, where he worked a lot with Francois Truffaut and Eric Romer. And in America, he worked for several directors, but most notably a film that we did a talk back on 2 years ago, Sophie's Choice. So I'm going to quote a little bit from a paragraph. This is Almendros's autobiography / memoir. And in it, he's got some really wonderful observations. The man was a good writer. Bear in mind, this book was published the same year as Places in the Heart came out. So there is no chapter on that film in this, but he was writing distinctly from an early 80s point of view and discussing the changes in technology in cinematography. Now, the paragraph I want to share with you is about lighting chiefly, and the difference between the old studio days, chiefly under black and white, and the more exterior, out of the studio look in color. Those direct lights of the black and white days are unbearable now in color film. From the early experiments of the new wave, we kept the use of indirect or diffuse lighting, but instead of directing it only from the ceiling, we direct it from the sides, the windows, or the lamps, from the real sources of light within a given setting. One must try to discover a different and original visual atmosphere for each film and even for each sequence to obtain variety, wealth, and texture in one's use of lighting while still taking advantage of modern techniques. So that's some of the framework he brought to bear. I will also note for you that Mr. Almendros's only Oscar was for the classic, and if you haven't seen it, drop everything after our talk back and go look for it. It's Days of Heaven from 1978, I believe, directed by Terrence Malick. So let's move on to some of the images here. This is an image very early in the film, and what I appreciate here relates to the thought that Max shared with me this morning, and I give all credit to Max for discovering it. It was in a book, I've forgotten the writer's name, a book about world film directors. And in it, he said that Robert Benton never made a secret of the fact that he relied on Nestor Almendros for the framing and the composition. Now, that is a bold statement. Most director cameraman partnerships do not discuss that sort of thing, although they will acknowledge that there's a general template that the director handles framing, composition, and camera movement. And the director of photography, the cinematographer, handles lighting and other things like post-production with the lab, etc. So framing here, this is what I'm talking about. You notice there's a door on the left, which we don't look through, but we look through a door into one interior room, which is looking into a second interior room, and he's got a closet door open looking at his gun. This is the ultimate framing in a doorway shot, and it's very effective. I love this shot. Again, we have to assume that Almendros composed the shot. Two illicit lovers in a broken down building meeting. And the thing that you may not realize, Ed Harris and Amy Madigan, the two actors here, got married, and they're still married. This year, they will celebrate their 40th anniversary, and they were married where else but Waxahachie, Texas, during the shooting of the film in the summer of 1983. They're still together with an adult daughter, I believe. One thing that is important to look at if you're judging a cinematographer is how he handles low light situations. And this is one of them. It is night. And if this were the naked eye, you wouldn't be able to see any of the detail on the house, like the dormers, I think they are, and the picket fence. But he manages to just suggest it with the right amount of light and still keeping the windows lit to let us know there are people in there and give us some perspective on the size and depth of the house. Here's another thing that Almendros, I'm sure he concocted this, dappled shade of sunlight passing through a tree and shining on the screened-in porch. And I wish I had a moving image here, but those trees are blowing back and forth. Very subtle and very realistic. Another subtle and realistic shot is this combination of interior for the party inside and exterior for the people who are hanging out on the porch outside. Beautiful lighting, beautiful, beautiful. He pulled it off. Another example of low light, nighttime. There is some sort of light casting shadows of the tree across the road, but what really brings it to life are the headlights of the car. It's just an extraordinary, beautifully calculated shot. And while we take a moment to step inside that car, the gentleman on the left, who is the leader of the string band that we see in almost every party scene, that guy is played by Burt Remsen, who was a very frequent collaborator with Robert Altman. You might even say he was part of Altman's troupe of actors that played in his films regularly. This is a wonderful example of the style that Almendros developed in Days of Heaven. Part of the legendary look of that film is that they filmed as much of it as they could at twilight or dawn. And that is what people in the business refer to as magic hour. Before the sun rises and casts direct light on everything, the sky is glowing. And that light shown on actors is the most flattering you can find. And here we see Sally Field leading her horse out at dawn to do some plowing. And it looks poignant. We know she's heading off to do a difficult task, but it's a beautiful setting. The storm comes, and some clever person said, well, we need some way to actually see the wind during the storm. So let's put a pile of papers on the landing right outside the school. And sure enough, they blow in the wind along with the skirts of the girls, etc. So it's pretty convincingly a storm. And here's something else that happens. Some of the early shots of the storm are sort of, people are looking at something, then we see what they're looking at in the sky, and it's just clouds rushing by without anything to give it a perspective or a size. Inserting this peaked roof really helps to realize how close those clouds are and how fast they're moving in comparison to the stationary building. this shot is out of order. Sorry, I skipped one. Let me go back. This is during the sequence where Frank gets punished by his mom for smoking at school. And the observers are Possum and Mr. Will, as Malkovich was frequently called. And this is a truly touching moment where he reaches out and takes her hand, and they both need someone to rely on in this moment. And now we'll go back to the second iteration of that as Mr. Will is looking for Possum. He can't see anything, but we see his hands groping across a table until he finally finds hers. And this is all part of a changing characterization of Malkovich's character. He is developing into a more fully developed and caring and concerned human being. I love this shot. This is a cinematographer's inspiration at work. How do you tell people that the storm is over? Shine a beam of light right through the crack in the storm cellar door. It's lovely, and it tells the story better than anybody saying, well, I guess the storm's done. This tells you what you need to see. And this tells you something else. This is what I almost think of as the money shot in the movie. This must have cost them quite a bit to arrange all this damage. The camera eventually pans to the left with Terry O'Quinn running to find Viola, his wife. It's a big scene, and it must have cost them something, probably a couple of days to set it up. I don't know why I put this shot in here, but it's just kind of indicative of a small town in the South. I'm presuming this is a statue to probably a Confederate soldier. I just like the way it's lit and framed. Here's another thing which is beautifully lit and framed. This is Ed Harris's character, Wayne, who comes into the bedroom looking for Viola, his lover who has spurned him already. They cast him in a blue shirt, which reflects the light that's coming from in front of him. It's window light, presumably, and just the whisper of a backlight touching the top of his head. I like this thing. Gary just referred to it as a clothesline. I guess that's what it is, but it's such a clever way to liberate a blind man so he can literally run out to talk to people while they're working on the cotton fields. Now, this little shot is very, very interesting, and I'll tell you why. This is a reverie, a daydream that Edna Spaulding has about her late husband, Royce. And why does it come in so late in the film, and what is the purpose? Well, I think this has to do as much with writing as anything else, because everybody had invested in the fact that the audience would recognize Royce Spaulding when they see him again at the end of the film. Now, this is already an hour into the film, and we have half an hour to go, at least, more likely 40 minutes. So they needed to remind the audience, oh yeah, that's her husband. That's what he looks like. I almost forgot about him. This could have been the result of screenings, advanced screenings where people didn't quite understand the ending because they didn't spot him, but they took care of it with this shot, unless they had it planned from the get-go. I really couldn't tell you. You all who have heard me before know that I love shots with mirrors and windows that add depth to the frame, and this is a classic example of Moses listening outside the window of the gin mill office as Mr. Simmons explains to Edna about the pricing. And I just want to also call attention to the actor playing Mr. Simmons. This was his very first film. He's gone on to be in at least, I think, 60 other films, usually bit parts. He worked for Robert Benton again on several occasions. I just thought he handled this very well, being sort of an average guy without expressing any evil intent, although he certainly helped perpetrate the values of an evil system of segregation. Another shot after the Ku Klux Klan attack. This is a lovely shot of Mr. Will comforting Moses after he's been beaten. And this sort of cements the story of Will being, I don't know, I almost want to think of as a guardian angel for the family in a certain sense. He is certainly a helpmate to all of them. This is a really poignant scene in the film as Moses is departing for all the right reasons. And he's giving gifts to Edna. And the most touching one is the one that was a handkerchief that belonged to his mother. So he has great value for these people. He places a high value on this whole family. Now we are at the last shot of the film. And this is, I guess it's a form of Protestant communion. I think that's all I can figure. I don't know a lot of church lore, but they're clearly passing around glasses of wine, I'm guessing, or grape juice for the kids. Here we see Ed Harris and his wife, Margaret, played by Lindsay Krause, starting this chain. And it goes on for 2 minutes in an unbroken shot, masterfully handled by Almendros. And it ends on this. This scene has great emotional impact for me. I won't go into a lot of it. I assume most of you did. But as I've been thinking back on what this represents, I want to stop my slideshow here and discuss what I remember thinking about it at the time, and it came back to me in the last couple of days. This is an example of what would have to be called magic realism, which was a literary genre that was basically imported in the 70s and into the 80s from Latin America. Writers such as Isabel Allende, Jorge Luis Borges, Allende from Chile, Borges from Argentina, Gabriel Garcia Marquez from Colombia, and Carlos Fuentes from Mexico. And I would like to quote a British novelist and critic by the name of David Lodge in a book called The Art of Fiction, where he defines magic realism as when marvelous and impossible events occur in what otherwise purports to be a realistic narrative. Well, that pretty well sums up what's happening here. And I remember I had read a lot of those aforementioned Latin writers before I saw this film. And I thought, wow, Hollywood, or Robert Benton at least, has awakened to this as a literary device, and it's now being used as a cinematic device to add depth to the story and show you other possibilities, other ways of thinking about what's happening. And that's all I got. I've got other things to say, but I'll let Max chime back in.
Well, now, Dan, just quickly, one question. That last shot, do you think, based on your experience, is that a handheld camera shot or?
I don't think so.
No.
I think it was on a very firm tripod. Otherwise, I suppose it could have been a steady cam shot, but the camera does not seem to be moving forward or back. So it just suggests it was a panning thing with maybe slight zooms going on. That's my guess.
If I were to speculate, I would say that it was on a track and they would have filmed it without sound. And once they reached the end of a row, the actors got out of the way, and they had and property people needed to move the pew aside so the camera could then move and track in the other direction at the next row. Because it's
That's
so
a good
smooth.
guess, but there also is a sense that the camera is gradually approaching the 2 rows back behind the front row. And I think that might have been a very gentle zoom, which a lot of directors and DPs did not like to use, but if they could hide it, it was okay. So we'll never know for sure, but it's fun to guess at these things.
Well, I love when we're not sure, because that's a sign of true ingenuity on the part of the artisans.
Exactly.
And it's, I don't know if it's sad or what, the fact that there aren't that many films whose endings are so remarkably conceived as this one. I mean, there are great films that end on a fascinating note, but the ending here is so impactful, visually and emotionally.
Oh, yes. And
when
musically.
The
hymn was just, it couldn't be more appropriate.
Absolutely. And Al Jean Harmits, when she was writing an article for the New York Times, right after the film opened, October of '84, there was an article called "How Endings Have Affected Two Recent Movies." I'm not sure what the other one was, but Robert Benton talked about that ending, and he said, there are certain things images can explain that words cannot. There is something in the image of the man who has been killed, handing the communion plate to the boy who killed him, that seems very moving to me in ways I cannot explain. I had the ending before I ever finished the screenplay, although I knew audiences would be confused by it.
And it's
I
so
remember,
lovely that Wiley, the young black character, the last words in the movie are peace of God, which he says to the man he killed.
I mean, it's just a very, very haunting, and
I-
and the fact that they're looking not in the same direction, but
Yeah.
the husband is looking downward. It's almost like an American Gothic type portrait in a way.
Yes, yes. And I'm surprised, frankly, that that image has not survived in American consciousness, because once you've seen it, you're never going to forget it.
Never.
I think the movie was fairly widely seen and appreciated, but you know, people sort of needed some reminding. I was just urging my partner Janet to watch it, who hadn't seen the film since it first came out, and she said, "Oh yeah, the ending. There's something about somebody appearing." And she said, "Was it surrealism?" And now I can say, no, it was magic realism, something which was in the popular literary consciousness by that time.
I'd forgotten about it too. And, you know, funny, I was reminded of a very different ending, but similar perhaps in some ways, when Peter Sellers walks on water and being there at in the very last shot of.
Yes. Good
And
point.
having grown up on international cinema, I got the ending. I understood that this was a semi-fantasy thing. Although when I saw it at a commercial cinema in the Valley in Van Nuys, California, the audience, I could tell, was baffled. They were chattering and chattering to each other. And it's like, will you people please be quiet? This is such a powerful moment.
Just open your heart to it. That's all that's
Exactly.
required. Places in the heart. Think through that and you'll get it.
One of our recent talkbacks was on Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye, and I had mentioned that in today's currency, that film would have cost about 30 million, and the same goes for Places in the Heart. In today's dollars, this was a $30 million film, and in today's dollars, domestically, it grossed about 101 million. So
that's not bad.
Not bad for
a good return.
A picture coming out the year of Ghostbusters and other brain cell depleting hits.
Yes.
A few words about the actors. Now, Sally Field, of course, had made 5 years ago Norma Ray for Martin Ritt and had won an Oscar for that. She came from Pasadena. She had to overcome some stereotyping and being in television series like Gidget and The Flying Nun. She was trapped in network TV in the early 70s. I would say Bob Rafelson's Stay Hungry sort of loosened her, liberated her slightly, and prepared her for future more meaningful.
That's the film I like to see again.
Yeah, kind of a cult picture.
And
John
she
Malkovich
also
had come. I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I was just going to add another good film of her prior to this was Absence of Malice, or maybe that came after this.
No, you're absolutely right. It was 3 years earlier, the Sidney Pollack film with Paul
where
Newman.
she had a very serious dramatic role opposite Paul Newman, and really was taken seriously as an actress and not just a girl in a silly nun costume.
No, precisely. And then we have from Chicago, John Malkovich, who had been with the Steppenwolf Theater there before taking on TV and film roles. This was a big fall of 1984. It was very big for Malkovich because not only did he have Places in the Heart, but he had an important role in Roland Joffe's The Killing Fields. He was the journalist who worked with the Sam, help me out.
Waterston. Sidney Shanberg, played by Sam Waterston.
Yeah,
exactly.
And Malkovich had been on Broadway with Dustin Hoffman in Death of a Salesman that same year as well. So that was his annus mirabilis, as we would say.
And he will appear in I think it's the Volker Schlondorf television version filming of that production in '85.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not forget Malkovich's masterly turn, I think later on in Dangerous Liaisons.
Oh, yeah.
That's one place where people justifiably got this kind of creeped out feeling looking at Malkovich. And I think they would be surprised to go back and see as I said, his transformation into a genuinely caring and concerned and giving individual in this film.
No, it's absolutely remarkable. And Gary's not going to believe I'm quoting Pauline Kael here. I'm actually quoting Pauline Kael, but she, of course, gave the film a mixed review. But she said about Malkovich, she said, when he speaks, the cinema gets very quiet, or the theater gets very quiet. He has kind of a mesmerizing power in his scenes. And Danny Glover, who came from San Francisco, was doing television work, and this was his breakthrough roles. And of course, we know he's going to be in the various action pictures with Mel Gibson. But another outstanding role he's going to have, is about 6 years later, is Charles Burnett's film To Sleep with Anger.
It's one we talked about doing on this program.
I recall
take
that
another quick break, and I will be back, gentlemen.
Of course, Gary.
Thank you.
And then other actors from the film, we talked about Lindsay Krause playing Margaret. She came from Manhattan to a very distinguished family. She was the daughter of playwright Russell Krause, and she
won the Oscar for supporting actress in this film.
I believe, she was nominated, but she actually didn't win the Academy Award.
I'll let you correct me on that, but whatever.
But
no, the two Oscars, excuse me, the two Oscars were for Sally Field and for Benton's screenplay.
Exactly. But she was definitely nominated. No question about that.
Yeah.
And she had first appeared on film in All the President's Men. She will appear in Joan Micklin Silver's Between the Lines. She'll be married to David Mamet, and she'll appear in his first directing film, House of Cards. And she'll also do work for Sidney Lumet and Michael Mann.
All right, I get to correct you. House of Games.
House of Games, thank you. Oh my goodness.
House of Cards is an entirely different animal. That's okay.
Yeah, it always happens whenever I reference House of Games, I always call it House of Cards.
That's fine.
And then Ed Harris's wife, or soon to be wife, Amy Madigan, like Malkovich, came from Chicago, was doing television work before we see her in this film. The following year, she and Ed Harris will appear in Louis Malle's, I believe, underrated Alamo Bay, which didn't get much of a release. And
where has she been lately? Do we know?
Apparently she's officially retired. I mean, she was very, very active into the 2010s, doing a lot of television work and things of that nature.
Yep.
But and then we have an actor who deserves a shout out, Lane Smith, who was the not quiet, not entirely devious banker, but you couldn't quite trust him.
Yeah.
He was from Memphis, Tennessee. Unfortunately died in 2005, but a lot of character parts. He was in Sidney Lumet's Network. He was, like Lindsay Krause, in Joan Micklin Silver's Between the Lines. And he'll also be in Paul Schrader's first film as a director, Blue Collar.
And something, I don't know, I'm just guessing, even though he has this sort of air of menace about him.
Yes, he does.
I suspect he was probably one of the world's nicest actors on set. I don't know. I'm just speculating, because frequently the guys who played heavies, like Robert Ryan, for example, were extremely nice and well respected. Same for Edward G. Robinson. So,
well, the first time I saw Lane Smith was in this Joan Micklin Silver film, Between the Lines, where he plays a ruthless editor who's taking over this alternative weekly.
There you go.
He's wanting to fire people, and he was a great villain in that piece. Just a terrific character actor. And another shout out I definitely think is due production designer Gene Callahan, production designer who, of course, works with the cinematographer and the director to determine the look of the film. But I mean, the look is remarkable, and everything down to the most seemingly insignificant props is so on target. And he had started out as a set decorator for directors such as Ilya Kazan, Robert Rosen, Otto Preminger, Sidney Lumet, and then he graduates to production design work in the early 60s, and had a very distinguished career before he died in 1990. So 6 years after Places in the Heart.
One other thing I want to touch on is the accuracy of the dialogue.
Yes.
And one thing leapt off the screen at me. The very first line of dialogue is when Edna is telling Possum to put her playthings away. And this took me back to my boyhood. I grew up in, everybody knows by now, Indianapolis, the urban Midwest. And in our neighborhood, there were a lot of people like my family who were pretty well educated, and a lot of other people who were kind of from a rural background, less well educated. And my parents would always say, put it away if I had a toy that should have been put away. But in this film, she says, put it up. Go ahead, Possum, put it up. That was the phrase that I heard in other kids' homes. I'm not an etymologist, but I noted these things. And it's interesting that up was away, up, and away.
But that's one of the pleasures of the film, is the dialogue is authentic. And I'm sure everybody has heard this speech from me far too many times, but nothing grates on me more than a so-called period film where everybody's talking like it's 2022. And Benton was very faithful to the era. And there's a lot of awful bigoted language here that tragically is authentic. That,
it is.
Whereas if they made the film today, they probably would have toned that down. But it's tragic that even when the little boy approaches the Danny Glover character, he uses some awful words. And the Danny Glover character is like, oh, here we go again. And he's sort of there to sort of try to improve the young boy's outlook. But that's authentic. And
as in my neighborhood, growing up in my same neighborhood that I just referenced in the 50s and into the 60s, the N-word was what people used. Most people did. My parents wouldn't allow it, but I heard it all the time in school, on the playground, and it's took about 20 years to get rid of that, but it still crops up every now and then.
Well, tragically, and everyone knows by now that I'm from Wisconsin, throughout the 60s and the 70s, and before I left in the early 80s, that was heard all the time as well. And this is despite all the advances made in civil rights. So the film is acknowledging that. It's not like wanting to because at the time I saw this as, oh, it seems like a very idyllic view or a sanitized view. Today it doesn't seem that way at all.
No.
It's
no. And the presence of the Klan.
Yes.
I will tell you one more story from my childhood. In the early 1920s, the Klan was so prevalent in Indiana that the governor of the state was an open, admitted member of it. They were that out there. And I remember my mother saying when she was a little girl, early 20s, she was walking home and passed by the Indiana State Fairgrounds and saw a Klan rally with full hoods and torches. And she said it was the scariest thing she had ever seen, even until this time late in her life when she was telling me about it. So they were there. They were very much a presence in almost every community.
Because really, that's really powerful, Dan, because really, about 10 years before this narrative of Places in the Heart takes place, the Klan was at the highest membership in its history.
Oh yeah,
I think 4.5 million members around the country. And I'll never forget, many of us have seen this. There's newsreel footage of a Klan march in Washington, D.C. in 1925. And it's just these white hoods as far as the eye can see going down Pennsylvania Avenue. And
yeah,
of course, this film is in the shadows of all that. And this is almost a grimly amusing movie-going story, but the second viewing of Places in the Heart for me was at the Lorena Theater in Van Nuys, California, a beautiful old deco type neighborhood cinema. And they were showing, of course, this was the days when they were projecting it in 35 millimeter film. They had 2 projectors going reel to reel, and that awful scene that you talked about where the Klan is terrorizing the Danny Glover character and John Malkovich is trying to intervene. At the moment when one of the Klan's members kneels down next to Danny Glover and makes that horrible comment, the sound on the projector went out and there was no sound. And I was beside myself. And I remember storming out into the lobby and banging on the projection room door. And they were like standing around talking. And I'm saying, you stop the projector and you back this scene up. You people have got to hear that. And they didn't. And I wrote a very angry letter to the chain, and they sent me some passes. But to me, it's just it's such an awful moment, but to be robbed of its full impact.
Well, let's
Really
hope
adds to
it
the-
was a nearly empty screening room when you saw it and not that.
No, it was a Saturday night, a packed
Oh,
house.
of course. Well,
You know, but it's, and I remember at the time some of the critics, and once again Pauline Kael, thought that the Klan stuff seemed a little precious to her. Their uniforms seemed a little too well pressed, but today it doesn't come off that way at all. It's really terrifying when they make their appearance.
well, just your mention of, or our mutual mention of the Klan reminds me of the Klan scene in Django Unchained, where they are mocked for their stupidity and ignorance, and somebody's wife who designed the hoods didn't get the eye holes cut right. So that's one way to deal with them, as just ridiculous, ineffectual people. I think we're in a different situation now since that movie came out after January 6th, and we understand the potential for political violence in America. And we would approach that sort of material very cautiously now, I think.
Well, and I think historically we have to remember that they were not an insignificant force in the American South and in the United
True that.
States.
Yeah.
They were very, very powerful, to linked to political parties and so on. But I'm sure by now, and thank you so much for your insights, Dan, I'm sure by now we may have some questions or thoughts from our audience to share. I will call upon the New Plaza team to assist me if Lori would like to assist me. And also a reminder for those of you New York Manhattan dwellers, a week from today, Sunday, whenever that is, the date is going to appear on our website. A week from today, Sunday, we are going to be doing another of our classic screenings at our actual cinema on West 67th Street. We will be showing Dorothy Arzner's Merrily We Go to Hell, thanks to Gary Palmucci. Finding that, it's a terrific pre-code drama with Sylvia Sidney and Frederick March. I will be presenting a mini 10-minute piece, almost a mini documentary on Dorothy Arzner prior to the showing of the movie itself. And then Gary and I will be there afterwards to talk about it.
That mini documentary, which I have not seen, could be useful in appreciating what we're going to do the following Sunday, which is a talkback on her postcode film, Dance Girl Dance. So we've got a couple of Arzner events coming up.
That's the 1940 Lucille Ball and Maureen O'Hara. So we
So
look
was
forward
she
to
the one who invented the boom mic? There's some different names out there.
Supposedly Dorothy Arzner did have something to do with them putting the mic on some kind of a pole so that it could record actors a little better. So apparently she did have a contribution to that.
But of course, because she was female, no one would ever give her credit for that.
Exactly. I've also heard Eddie Mannix's name in the mix and a couple of other men.
Yeah. There's always several layers to a Hollywood legend. But
I think you're going to find that film very contemporary in many ways in its take on things.
Oh yeah, no, it was unavailable for such a long time. And you mean the Dance Girl Dance? Absolutely, very contemporary, very contemporary. So that'll be our next talk back, and before that, of course, we have our in-cinema screening. Any questions or thoughts?
I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question, please hit on the reaction button. You can raise your hand and ask a question. Anybody? Nobody? The guy who plays the banker, wasn't he in My Cousin Vinny?
Lane Smith.
Wasn't he the prosecuting attorney?
It may have been. I mean, he did so much character work in features and on television.
Was he from the South? Do we know?
Yes, he was from Memphis, Tennessee.
That explains it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because when I saw the end of the movie, again, I haven't seen it since it first came out, and I saw the little black boy. I was like, I had to rewind it because I think what stopped me from whatever is that I saw Danny Glover there and I thought he had gone away. at that
That's
point.
the first time when an audience reacts. I
Yeah.
remember there's kind of an intake of breath, like, what's he doing here?
Well,
Right,
first of yeah,
right.
but there's another layer to that. The first way to be taken aback is the fact that churches were segregated. So you never
Right,
would have.
right,
That was the
right.
whole point of the scene, because here they are preaching all these gospels, and yet they're segregated. They won't let blacks into the pews with Caucasians.
So was Danny Glover really there?
No,
He
this was
He had
all a
left
wish
town,
fulfillment.
but this is
Okay,
part of the.
I'm just that I
Yeah.
was a little confused, and I was like, oh, he's still in town. And then when they pan past the husband and the little boy, I'm like, what? There's another black person there, you know? And I had to like rewind it, and it just like,
Well,
No,
this was,
this was a fantasy. It was a fantasy.
but it was unexpected in a Hollywood film in
Right,
1984.
absolutely.
And that's why I cited it as a pioneering use of magic realism.
Well, the other thing is even when the boy shoots her husband, you get the feeling that he knows the boy and likes the boy. Like, come on, what are you doing? You know, like
Right.
there's no malice
Just
there
knows
at
him by
all.
name, and apparently they were, cordial with
Done
each
this
other.
before, you know, and that
Yeah.
kind of explains her attitude when the Danny Glover character Mose gets caught stealing her silverware. You know, I mean, in those days, most people would have just said, you know, lynch him, you know, and she was like, no, you know, I told
Covered
you.
for him. Yeah.
So it really shows that she was in line with her husband, that they were both like good people and not racist, to whatever extent.
Yeah,
Can
no,
you
Sense.
can you talk a little bit about the kids who played the children's roles?
yes. Thank you for asking about the children. Not a lot beyond the film. I have to look up the actor. I meant to look up the actor who played Wiley. Jenny James played Possum. She was a child actress doing work in the 1980s, but I didn't see much beyond the 1980s for her. And I could find virtually nothing about the son who played Frank, Yankton Hatton. And as we talk, I will try to see if I can get more information
And
on Wiley.
frankly, it's more to their betterment that they didn't continue acting for a long time. If you look at the history of child actors in
It's
Hollywood,
horrible.
it's not good.
It's
Drug addiction, suicide, you name it. They're all over the map. And I'm just glad these kids escaped it.
Yeah, the actor who played Wiley, Devereaux White, actually, oh my gosh, he's been did quite a number of films, some television work in the 1980s, and then some selective film appearances. He was in Action Jackson in the late 80s, and the original Die Hard. He was and then several television films. So he did have some activity. Out of the children, he was the one who went on to do the most stuff.
Any questioners yet?
Anybody?
Maybe this is it. I think we've managed to cover things quite well today.
I think we found out that just for the ending alone, it was worth taking another look at this film.
Absolutely.
Hopefully
It
some
was
other
very
films the same way.
unexpected because it seems so straightforward, and then you're like, I'm telling you, I was like, wait a minute, what? Like I had to stop and rewind because then it just went to black, and I'm like, what did I just see? You know, I was like, that was her
Lori,
husband.
you sound like one of those preview audiences who writes on the card, I didn't get the ending. I'm teasing.
No, that I only do that at Coen Brothers movies. No, I'm teasing.
And I think Nestor Almendros' cinematography, I think the expression "lit from within" was invented for that there, because that's
nice, very nice.
And that's I want to just add that's especially evident in the frame, Dan, that you showed of the party when people in the foreground are dancing on a porch, and on the inside they're dancing inside the house, and it's lit on the inside. It's just beautiful use of lighting right there.
Getting that balance perfect is not easy, folks. I mean,
yeah.
He was very experienced by this time, and I have to say that Mr. Almendros died of cancer at age 61, which is an unfortunate thing. He should have survived much longer. But
Terrible loss.
One of our audience, Della Smith, says the ending has a powerful spiritual meaning that is tied in with the act of sharing Holy Communion. Would you like to elaborate on that, Della? If not, that's fine.
Or
And thank
Dan, perhaps you, or if Della can't, Dan, I know you had some.
no, I am not an expert on communion, believe me.
No, but we were talking the other day, and Dan had mentioned your father had said that the
Well,
ending for him
yeah.
indicated that religion is supposed to bring people together.
Exactly. My father he had a jaundiced view of the church in general, and he just chimed in with a quavering voice saying, this is what religion is supposed to do rather than driving a wedge between people. And I think he nailed it. But I'm not sure that most of the audience saw it that way. Maybe
Della, I see Della's unmuted.
Oh,
Did
good.
you want to say something?
Thank you. I'm sorry, my camera's not working.
That's okay.
Yeah, I cry like a baby at that ending scene every time.
Me too.
So powerful with the religion and communion and forgiveness and peace. It's just really powerful. I'm sorry you think that most people didn't get that out of it, because it really is unforgettable.
That was a cynical remark from me. I would hope that everybody got it, but it's hard to tell in America.
Let me ask you guys a technical
Thank you,
question.
Della. Thank you so much.
Della.
Thank you.
Why do you think it didn't win any more Oscars?
Well, let's see. It was the big winner that year was Amadeus. It's hard to say why. It's certainly you because cynically, when the LA Weekly, the weekly newspaper in Los Angeles, when the film came out, the critic, I forget who it was, dismissed the film as Oscar bait. This is a movie that just has all the elements of an Oscar movie. Quite cynical, but it's just hard to say. By the fall, you did have Amadeus, you did have The Killing Fields, you did have A Soldier's Story, and
Passage to India by David
Passage to
Lean was
India, yes.
the other nominated film. That would have gotten my vote, but
Yeah, so it was just, I think just the competition was pretty
then at least
stiff that year. Just a theory.